All right, guys, Washington politicos seem to be on a spending spree with our tax dollars to the outrage of citizens across America. Will taxpayers take their anger out at the polls? Let's ask Joel Pollak, Republican congressional candidate from Illinois. Mr. Pollak, taxpayers dished out over $200 billion to the banks, actually over $1 trillion to the banks all told. Some families can barely afford to feed their children at the same time. What is going on? Why are we got welfare for the banks and not for the poor people, and when will it end?
Well, it hasn't ended yet because the federal government is about to give $75 million to another bank, one that happens to have very high-profile political connections. You know, there were 30 banks that failed in Illinois since the beginning of 2009, and 72 have failed since the beginning of this year, but only one's getting bailed out, and that's ShoreBank. And it's being bailed out, as both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times have observed, because of its high-profile connections. Now, you talk about hurting the poor. The defense of ShoreBank's friends is that, well, this is a community bank and it helps poor communities. In 2008, this has just come out today, it began predatory lending in poor communities, and I'll show you where. These are some of the poorest neighborhoods in Chicago on the south side and west side, black and Latino communities, particularly this area where the number of predatory loans was the highest. That's Woodlawn, where the median income is at federal poverty level. That's what ShoreBank started doing when it had to balance its bottom line, and yet we're being told we've got to bail out this bank with Wall Street money and federal taxpayer money.
Hey, Joel, are you saying, let's take it one step further, you're saying that your opponent, Representative Schakowsky, has ties? What are you alluding to, sir?
Well, Representative Schakowsky has played the lead role in lobbying for the ShoreBank bailout. And we know she took thousands of dollars in campaign contributions from ShoreBank, but this week I discovered another piece of evidence that suggests a conflict of interest. This is the court document from the sentencing of her husband, Robert Creamer, who was convicted in 2006 of check kiting and tax evasion. And here he says in his own words that ShoreBank was one of the banks he was defrauding as part of his check kiting scheme, and that when the scheme stopped because one of the other banks said, we're not honoring your checks anymore, the first bank he went to was ShoreBank. And ShoreBank did a special favor for him by giving him a chance to get the cash together he needed to pay everybody. At trial, in the end, once he had raised $1.4 million plus, that meant that he could say, look, I've paid everybody back, and that gave him a lighter federal sentence. So at best, this is a conflict of interest for Representative Schakowsky, and at worst, it looks like payback.
Mr. Pollak, can we just read the statement that we got from Representative Jan Schakowsky regarding her husband? ShoreBank did not offer the slightest bit of special consideration to my husband, Robert Creamer, and his organization, Citizens Action of Illinois, banked at ShoreBank, as well as several other banks. 13 years ago, he sought to convert an overdraft to a loan, and ShoreBank said no. End of story. I never sought help from the state of Illinois. Bill Brandt, chairman of the Illinois Finance Authority, after hearing about the difficulties ShoreBank was facing, contacted the bank and discussed the possibility of a loan, not a bailout, not an equity investment, but a loan for ShoreBank. No agreement whatsoever has been consummated as far as I know. I thought it would be important that you heard that. You no doubt have heard that comment, right?
Well, that's what she says, but that's not what taxpayers know. And what we need to do is have the federal government go in there and have an independent forensic audit before we pay a single penny further of taxpayer dollars to ShoreBank. We need to know what's going on. There are other community lending institutions like Park National that failed, that Representative Schakowsky did not help. There are banks in her own district like Bank of Lincolnwood that failed last year. She didn't help them either. Why ShoreBank? Why is ShoreBank so important? And it's not just her. It's Bill Clinton. It's all these people, and we need to know, the American people need to know, are there other deals at ShoreBank that we don't know about that are the true reason?
I think it goes beyond crooked Chicago politics. I mean, I think we've been seeing and hearing things like this for a while now. It harkens back to Chris Dodd and Angela Mozillo getting sweet deals. Now we hear Joe Sestak potentially was asked to take a different job. It comes down, I think, to corruption in our government. Maybe that's a platform you could stand on instead, as opposed to narrowing in on this. The taxpayers in general want to hear that something is being done everywhere.
Right. Well, there seem to be one set of rules for people in Washington and another set of rules for everybody else. Some people call that crony capitalism. I don't think there's anything capitalistic about it at all. I call it crony socialism, because you have people who purport to be representing the interests of the poor, and in reality they're just enriching themselves and their friends.
Well, and you know, I love that you're actually calling out with the word socialism, because that's what it is. These guys on Wall Street that took bailout money are all a bunch of socialists. They are not capitalists. What about that, the very concept that we're talking about, that it's outrageous that somehow the banks are on welfare and the poor people in those towns are even being targeted? And on top of it, I think what you're alluding to is these representatives get welfare lobby funds, they get welfare donations from these same firms that then they send more welfare money to, and it becomes one big vicious cycle.
I agree, and what they're not doing is creating jobs in those communities. You know, the best form of insurance and assistance is a job that you can keep, and that's what we have not been creating in the city of Chicago while we've been busy creating all these corporate welfare schemes. As a result, jobs are leaving our city, leaving our community and our state. We've got to reverse that, not just in Chicago, but across the nation, and make job creation the focus. Every dollar of private capital that the Wall Street banks are using to save ShoreBank is a dollar that's not being sent on a small business or a job creation project here at home, and that really is the problem. We've got to get back to the basics of how we build an economy.
Fairly sad state of affairs when your competitor is explaining why her husband didn't actually, get anything from a bank. He was just trying to float a check or something illegal. I don't know. It's just nuts. Chicago politics. I'm from Chicago. It gets crazier and crazier by the minute. Why do you want to do this? I mean, what's in it for you?
Somebody has got to stand up to this and put a stop to it. I want to see the same level of personal responsibility that I have to exercise in my own financial life and that you have to as well, reflected in Washington, D.C. Because if we don't see it, I'm seeing the results every day in my neighborhood. I see the shuttered stores. I see the homes in foreclosure. And that keeps happening because the priorities are all wrong in Washington. They're trying to protect the insiders instead of getting back to the basics and doing what's right for our economy. It's just about job creation, balancing the budget, keeping taxes low, and letting the American people move forward and achieve their dreams.
Well, and I know some of the things you've talked about is introducing legislation to freeze discretionary spending, opposing earmarks, tackling Social Security and Medicare. I mean, this is the cry of the American people right now, and it just seems to be falling on deaf ears.
That's what I learned when I stood up to Barney Frank. I got emails and letters from all around the country, and I realized, hey, I just asked the guy a simple question when I said to him, how much responsibility do you have for the financial crisis? And it was just a simple question. He lost his temper. But what amazed me was how many Americans felt that nobody was asking those questions and nobody was standing up, and that the moment you did, you got an earful. That's got to stop, and I'm going to Washington to change that.
We're just about out of time. You got to address, why would I vote for anybody with an R or a D next to their name? You guys are all a bunch of socialists.
You got to vote for somebody who's prepared to do the right thing regardless of party, who's going to get in there, balance the budget, lower taxes, and get Americans working again. And that we've got to believe in. That's the way we change in our political system. The American people, as Tocqueville said, do not fear change, but we fear revolutions. We voted for change in 2008, but we got a massive revolution. We're going to vote again for change in 2010, not to start a revolution, but to stop one, and to get back to building our economy the way we know how.
Okay, good luck with that, Joel. Joel Pollak, thank you so much for being with us. All right, quick, grab